Spoiler warning for not only Be Cool Scooby-Doo, but also any of the series that came before it, especially Scooby-Doo Mystery Incorporated. The Scooby-Doo franchise has remained popular for more than half a century, going through numerous reboots, reimaginings, one-off specials, and live-action adaptations. Despite this, it has mostly maintained its core premise of a group of teenage kids solving mysteries with their talking dog. The Scooby Gang started out as what old white men living through the turbulent 1960s wanted teenagers to be: clean, helpful, chaste, polite to authorities, solving mysteries that, with few exceptions, involved greedy men trying to cheat or steal using cosplay to frighten others away from their schemes. The franchise would evolve either by having washed up or dead celebrities as guest stars, to featuring real supernatural beings as villains, and even child versions of the main characters. Every series has its detractors, but one in particular seems to consistently rank low on the fan hierarchy: 2015's Be Cool Scooby-Doo. From the rankings on IMDb to any number of internet top 10 lists, Be Cool Scooby-Doo is often tossed onto the same rhetorical trash heap with Get a Clue and any of the Scrappy series. Wait a minute. A pup named Scooby-Doo seriously has a higher rating? This is unfair because Be Cool Scooby-Doo, while obviously never having a prayer in reaching the same heights as its predecessor, Mystery Incorporated, was still a good entry in the Scooby-Doo franchise. Here are my 12 reasons why Be Cool Scooby-Doo doesn't deserve all the hate. The trend these days for television and streaming series seems to be serial storytelling, with every season having a central plot with all the episodes meant to be watched in a specific order. In other words, making television viewing the equivalent of watching a 12-hour movie in 1-hour increments. While this can of course make for compelling television, it can also lead to a lot of filler episodes that often don't move the plot, or at worst, feel like a waste of time. While there are shows that get serial storytelling right, many find it difficult to pull off successfully. One of the good things about Mystery Incorporated was their overarching storyline, but as mentioned in my video on that series, it was more akin to the X-Files than, say, Obi-Wan Kenobi. In the former, each episode featured a monster of the week, with maybe a nod or two toward one of the main series plot threads like Mulder's missing sister or Scully's pregnancy. By contrast, a series like the latter often begins an episode by immediately continuing where the previous one ended. The downside to serial storytelling is the viewer will need to not only watch every episode, but they will have to watch them in sequential order. Otherwise, they'll likely miss a key moment in the overall story or spoil a dramatic reveal. Be Cool Scooby-Doo is a return to episodic storytelling, where with the exception of a single 2-part episode, the series can be watched in any order. At worst, you might not get a joke based on a callback to something that occurred earlier, but you'll never be lost. In the penultimate episode, they mention a villain who had been stalking Fred during the entire run, but it's really not important to the series as a whole, and frankly the revelation felt just a little bit tacked on. Understand, I'm not criticizing overarching storylines or serialized storytelling as a concept, but Be Cool Scooby-Doo is a welcome return to a casual television experience. One problem facing anyone tasked with creating a Scooby-Doo series is coming up with unique antagonists. After 50 years, it's difficult to avoid rehashing the same monsters or villain motivation. There are only so many ways you can dress up real estate swindlers or unscrupulous treasure hunters. Werewolves, zombies, witches, vampires, mutant animals, legendary cryptids, each Scooby series or film tends to reuse the same stock monster archetypes. Even The Incredible Mystery Incorporated did the same thing, with many of the villains falling into common Scooby monster tropes. I'm not going to say that Be Cool Scooby-Doo doesn't do the same thing. In fact, they occasionally heavily rehash earlier monsters. In fact, the very first episode features an updated version of a bad guy from Scooby-Doo Where Are You? However, these villain choices are seldom just cheap callbacks and are often used to good effect. That first episode villain, for example, may have been the ghost of Elias Kingston from What the Heck's Going On, but here he was not the worst uncle featured in a Scooby episode trying to steal his family's fortune. Instead, the ghost haunting the prestigious university featured on Be Cool Scooby-Doo ended up being a bitter gas station attendant, angry he hadn't been allowed to enroll as a student. Further examples of creative villains include a prisoner haunting the prison he escaped from as his own ghost, the spirit of an overbearing mother haunting her son's hotel in an obvious nod to Alfred Hitchcock's Psycho, or even an episode with multiple independent bad guys terrorizing a train in a possible allusion to Murder on the Orient Express. Continuing with what works so well in Mystery Incorporated, the gang in Be Cool Scooby-Doo again have more personality than most earlier Scooby series and films, albeit with mixed results. Fred exhibits a lot of character here, specifically when coming to terms with what being in charge of such an eclectic group of teenagers does to his mental state. Several episodes center around his role as leader, whether it's how effective he is in command, how the others see him as a control freak, and even suffering a mental breakdown that can only be cured by temporarily refraining from solving mysteries. We see moments in Fred's childhood that led to this obsession, as well as hitherto unrevealed revelations of the life he could have had if traps and unmasking villains hadn't gripped him at such a young age. Velma once again shows the least amount of charm. While not the usual smug know-it-all from earlier series, the writers ramped up her nerdiness to 11 this time around. Gone is the acerbic teenage personality from Mystery Incorporated, and instead she seems to be channeling a middle-aged spinster plagued with allergies and neuroses, including a major fear of water. Though frequently shunted aside to let other characters take the spotlight, which is par for the course for a Scooby series, Velma is still treated as an integral part of the gang, as there are not one but two episodes that showcase her sacrificing personal opportunities to remain with her friends. When it comes to which member of the gang changed the most in this series, it's a toss-up between Daphne or Shaggy and Scooby. Until the late 1990s, Daphne may have been the least interesting of all the gang. She was originally just there to be, essentially, the dumb pretty girl obsessed with her hair, who gave Shaggy and Scooby the occasional break from screwing up Fred's traps as she took on that duty.
I think I hear them coming. Daphne, don't lean over so far!
Danger-prone Daphne did it again!
Zombie Island ushered in the modern take on Daphne as a level-headed, assertive character who was an equal contributor to the gang's mystery solving. Although it wasn't until Mystery Incorporated that she was allowed to really grow a personality. They leaned hard into changing Daphne up in Be Cool Scooby-Doo, making her more of the comic relief than Shaggy and Scooby. And in a series where all the main characters are the comic relief, that's saying something. Daphne shows off a new quirk in almost literally every episode, whether it be wearing a fake beard, dressing as a mime, or spending the entire episode as a vampire. This version of Daphne is a major aspect of Be Cool Scooby-Doo that disgruntled fans focus on, considering it too much of a change in the character. But frankly, I love this version of Daphne. Not only is she finally allowed to cut loose, but it's clear that her voice actress, Grey Delisle, seemed to be having a blast with it. Finally, to the heart of every Scooby series, Shaggy and Scooby. While on the surface, these two remain the gluttonous cowards that defined them ever since they were a mere twinkle in Joe Ruby's eyes, their relationship gets explored in Be Cool Scooby-Doo even further than in Mystery Incorporated. Be Cool Scooby-Doo takes the time to explore the bond between Shaggy and Scooby as owner and his ostensibly pet dog. In Scooby-Doo Where Are You?, there were times when this seemed fairly clear. And in Mystery Incorporated, we saw just how few rights Scooby had as a sentient being after Shaggy's parents sent him to that internment camp. Farm. But through most of the history of Scooby-Doo, he is often treated as just another person, not only by the rest of the gang, but by the general public as well. Indeed, the few times his status as a dog is addressed over the years, it's usually treated as a joke, and not as the way things should be.
Who brought this dog?
Dog? Where?
As if a talking dog wouldn't blow everyone's mind the moment they encountered one. Hell, the internet went nuts over that one dog with a howl that sounded like I love you. In one episode of Be Cool Scooby-Doo, Shaggy and Scooby have a falling out after Shaggy refers to himself as a dog owner. Incensed, Scooby spent much of his time afterward partnered with the other members of the gang, leaving Shaggy to ponder why his best friend was so upset. Individually, both Shaggy and Scooby are well developed here. Shaggy is more introspective, openly questioning what choices he made in his life that led him to being chased by monsters, whereas in previous series, he was generally just passively reacting to his circumstances. Scooby, meanwhile, has never been more self-aware, often reacting sarcastically to events around him and occasionally being the voice of reason. Yet through it all, Be Cool Scooby-Doo maintains the traditional dynamic of these two characters, fleshing out their personalities while never replacing them in a misguided attempt to be dark or edgy. Also, if it's your thing, Scooby has spent more time dressed as a woman in this series than contestants in an entire season of RuPaul's Drag Race.
Dressing up a dog as a waitress? Although, granted, that's just on the books in Idaho.
My finest moment.
I'm going on record to state that despite my absolute love of Mystery Incorporated and my deep conviction it is the greatest Scooby series ever, I am perfectly fine with it having ended after just 2 seasons. It was a full run of 52 episodes that satisfactorily resolved every character arc and concluded on a mostly high note. There's nothing wrong with the series coming to an end if they do things right. But for those of you who demanded a 3rd season of Mystery Incorporated, why not use headcanon and consider Be Cool Scooby-Doo an unofficial direct follow-up? They ended Mystery Incorporated with the gang starting a cross-country journey in the Mystery Machine, essentially beginning their lives as highway nomads. And while the personalities of the gang may seem to be very different in the newer series, they also went through some life-changing bullshit by the end of Mystery Incorporated, including seeing everyone they ever knew or loved gruesomely killed in front of them. And despite a reasonably happy ending, the defeat of the evil entity resulted in the creation of an entirely new timeline. And these 4 teenagers and their dog ended up stuck in a world they didn't even know. That would screw up anyone's psyche, and at the very least result in PTSD, but more likely, massive existential self-doubt. Why wouldn't Fred question his leadership skills considering how they just barely defeated their nemesis? Or how he never even realized that the man he thought was his father was a fake, or how twisted his real parents would be given the right circumstances. Velma's best friend outside of the gang, and possible romantic interest, was murdered within earshot as Velma was forced to abandon her. She was also there when another friend and adult mentor was killed in an undersea explosion. All this trauma would go a long way toward explaining a neurotic personality and fear of water. Daphne spent much of her time in Mystery Incorporated trying to live up to her parents' expectations while doing her best to lead a normal life of a teenage girl under extraordinary circumstances. Yet in the end, all of her efforts proved pointless. This would explain her need for trying out new things and living for the moment, because she saw firsthand how people aren't given an unlimited supply of moments. Shaggy and Scooby had their friendship tested a lot during the events of Mystery Incorporated, while passively accepting much of what was done to them. Even when they thought they were acting on their own initiative, they discovered they had been mere puppets on a string, dancing to the machinations of a centuries-old mystical being, which included their very friendship itself. One can't help but be on guard against being manipulated like that again, or to have the occasional fight between friends. I'm not saying that Be Cool Scooby-Doo should be seen as the third season of Mystery Incorporated, but there's no harm in treating it like that for those who really wanted the earlier series to continue. Almost all the regular Scooby cast return for this series, with one major exception. Frank Welker continues his over 5-decade-long role as Fred, putting him at or near the top of the list as most time spent by a Western voice actor playing the same part. Thus, there's not a lot to say about his performance in Be Cool Scooby-Doo. Frank Welker is Fred Jones at this point, and when the time comes for him to no longer be the one playing the part, whoever they get will have a big ascot to fill. Welker also once again voices Scooby-Doo, making him the de facto official actor for that role for over 2 decades. This may be sacrilegious, but Welker's Scooby is possibly the best in the entire franchise. With no disrespect intended to the memory of the legendary Don Messick, Welker's Scooby is much easier to understand while at the same time maintaining the classic Scooby vocal idiosyncrasies. For someone like myself who, while not deaf, still uses subtitles to fully comprehend what's being spoken, Welker's delivery is very welcome. As mentioned earlier, Grey DeLisle really ran with Daphne this time around. A voice actor is often confined by the words on the page, and it's their job to breathe life into whatever is written, regardless of the quality of the script. It's also not uncommon for an actor to phone in their work, doing nothing more than blandly reading lines in front of a pop guard. But when an actor really gets into their role, when the material is something they can sink their teeth into, it's a kind of magic. Just as Mystery Incorporated allowed DeLisle a chance to bring actual pathos to Daphne, Be Cool Scooby-Doo gave her comedic talents a chance to shine. Having been the official Daphne for over 2 decades herself now, it's unthinkable that any other artist would encapsulate that role better. DeLisle is Daphne Blake, just as much as Frank Welker is Fred Jones. Matthew Lillard returns as Shaggy, and while he's only been doing the voice for a little over a decade, he was the first live-action Shaggy way back in 2002, living his part for almost as long as Grey DeLisle has been living hers. Lillard brings a life to the beatnik beanpole that few other actors have before. Casey Kasem originated the role back in 1969, and most actors who voiced Shaggy when Kasem was unavailable or unwilling to return seem to be more concerned with replicating Kasem's voice rather than breathing life into the character. Lillard, however, brings an interpretation that remains reminiscent of Kasem, yet is entirely his own thing. If one were to listen to just the audio tracks of all the Shaggy actors over the years, Kasem and Lillard would be equally as distinctive, yet at the same time, both quintessentially Shaggy. In Be Cool Scooby-Doo, Lillard continues his stellar performance, and given a lot more than the usual "Zoinks run" dialogue with which he's often saddled. As I'll go into with more detail later, many episodes feature Shaggy and Scooby disguising themselves to escape a monster, providing the rare treat of an actor voicing a character who is also pretending to be another character. And just like Grey DeLisle, the fun Lillard had during the reading is right there on screen. And now we come to the toots in the room. Kate Micucci as Velma. It's going to be difficult for me to remain impartial because I love Kate Micucci. She's hilarious, she's talented, she's beautiful, she's 5'2". When you're short as I am, you tend to feel a lot of affection for anyone shorter than yourself. I love my wife and we've been together for over 20 years, but the only reason I started dating her in the first place is because she's only 4'8". Having said all these nice things about Micucci, I must admit that while she does a fine job as Velma and perfectly encapsulates the neurotic nebbish the producers were asking for, she's no Mindy Cohn. Cohn voiced Velma for almost a decade and a half, including in the best Scooby series of all time. And while I'm glad to see Micucci involved in the show, it was disappointing to see Cohn replaced. It's been said that Cohn retired voluntarily due to health reasons, which is something actors do all the time. However, a tweet she sent after the disastrous cast announcement for the recent theatrical Scooby film gives the impression her departure may not have been her call. To date, Cohn hasn't publicly confirmed if or why she was fired, but in the voice industry, it's not a good idea to air out any dirty laundry if you want to remain employed. Right, Charlie Adler? As discussed in one of my earlier videos, voice artists are the low man on the Hollywood totem pole. If you have enough clout that you can safely complain about being replaced, your name is probably big enough they won't want to replace you in the first place. Micucci's Velma is more than adequate, but sadly she doesn't feel as invested in the Orange Queen of the Nerds as Cohn was. If given enough time, hopefully she'll grow into the role, but given the history of how often Velma is recast, I'm not exactly holding my breath. As for the supporting cast, there really isn't much to note about Be Cool Scooby-Doo, especially when compared to the previous series. Indeed, Welker and Delisle seem to cover many of the additional voices themselves. Of the guest roles they're often handled by the usual talent for hire that shows up in most animated series produced these days, including Rob Paulsen, Dee Bradley Baker, Debbie Derryberry, and Kevin Michael Richardson. However, it was nice to see a couple of Mystery Incorporated actors return, including Mr. E's Lewis Black and Dean Fink's Mindy Sterling. And of course, Mark Hamill makes his obligatory appearance. Honorary mention should be given to the casting for the episode that took place in Japan. They did take enough care to not only cast Asian actors in the appropriate roles, but also actors more known for anime voice dubbing than traditional Western animation. They've certainly come a long way since this. I've said before that Mystery Incorporated felt like a love letter to previous Scooby series when it comes to references. Be Cool Scooby-Doo continues this trend, but often more blatantly, as the focus was more on comedic effect than logic or maintaining continuity.
The incongruity in water pressure meant the only one who could have taken the gold was Dr. Cutler. Blah, 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 blah.
Aha! Captain Cutler! Good work, gang.
Captain Cutler, of course, is one of the original iconic Scooby-Doo Where Are You villains, appearing in the first season episode, A Clue for Scooby-Doo.
Aren't you guys musicians too? I thought I was the lead guitarist in our band. Why else do we drive around in a van everywhere?
During one of their initial concept stages, the Scooby Gang was originally envisioned as a traveling rock band solving mysteries between gigs. Charlie the Robot from Foul Play and Funland makes a cameo here, chasing the original animated version of the gang in one of several appearances of that retro style, which also includes this X-ray security check referencing a similar moment in 1990's Total Recall, and once again in this Hall of Mirrors. Speaking of mirrors, the Be Cool Scooby-Doo series ends with the revelation that Fred's father was a villain, the infamous Professor Huh? Which mirrors the end of Mystery Incorporated when we learn that who we thought was Fred's father, Mayor Jones, was the freak of Crystal Cove. The Be Cool Scooby-Doo episode, Where There's a Will, There's a Wraith, is the Never Say Never Again of the series. Being a remake of the original Scooby-Doo Where Are You episode, A Night of Fright is no delight. Both feature Scooby having to spend the night in a creepy mansion in order to satisfy the conditions of an eccentric colonel's will, all while being terrorized by a couple of green phantoms. This episode is filled with references, including creepy lawyer named Cosgood, referring to one of the villains from the original episode, Cosgood Creeps, and a fictional chemical compound called sodium maldehyde, referring to one of the heirs in the original episode, Sweet Cousin Maldehyde.
Why would the Colonel wish a night of fright like this on anyone?
He said it! He said it!
Considering that it was the very next series after Mystery Incorporated, it may be too soon to congratulate the creators of Be Cool Scooby-Doo for trying to be different from what came before, as what came immediately before was itself so different than everything preceding it. Having said that, they do deserve praise for not immediately going back to the same well visited by practically every Scooby series that came before or after. While Mystery Incorporated felt like the producers were trying a more adult take on a Scooby series while still remaining a cartoon, Be Cool Scooby-Doo felt like they wanted to experiment by spending 2 seasons doing whatever popped in their head. One episode, Be Quiet Scooby-Doo, had the gang solving a mystery while being required to be completely silent, though we still heard what was in their heads. Harkening back to that one time on the old Buffy the Vampire Slayer show when their Scooby gang were once forced to solve a mystery with no dialogue. And I just referred to a television series that came out 20 years ago as old, despite remembering when it first came out. Wow, that's depressing. In a similar vein, in the episode I Scooby-Dooby-Doo, while attending a wedding, the gang are forced to do their best to unmask a ghost determined to stop the ceremony, all while keeping the superstitious bride from learning about the ghost or their investigation. In Ren Scare, the mystery takes place at a Renaissance fair, forcing the gang to stop a villain while maintaining period-appropriate dress and mannerisms. That wasn't the only episode dealing with a historical setting, as we see in the episode Scroogey-Doo the events of Charles Dickens' A Christmas Carol through the eyes of a 19th century version of the Scooby Gang. Most episodes also feature the usual moment when Shaggy and Scooby don disguises to escape from the monster chasing them, but they really doubled down on this trope for Be Cool Scooby-Doo, culminating in one episode where the bad guy gets so involved in the scenario that he literally ends up back at his house before realizing he'd been tricked. As I've said, they've come a long way since this. As any franchise achieves longevity, it becomes more tempting for those creating new content to start adding moments where the characters occasionally break the fourth wall, or at the very least become self-aware of their situation.
It looks like this dude ranch has some fun activities. Roping, riding, even river rafting. Those are all words you can pronounce, Scooby!
Roping, riding, river rafting?
Modern Scooby-Doo has gone the same route, and if that's the sort of thing you enjoy, like I do, Be Cool Scooby-Doo has got you covered.
Listen, Dr. Dunsbury, we can help. We solve mysteries like this all the time.
Constantly.
It's weird, really.
Oh.
Like, this really is a nightmare. Maybe Daphne's right.
Yeah, dogs can't talk.
This is where you normally have us split up. It's to confuse and disorient the monster, right?
No, it's because the monster always follows Shaggy and Scooby, and it gives us a chance to take a breather.
Like I knew it! Like, I can't believe these people. They pounce on the free-spirited woman, but they have no problem with the guy who can eat 20 pies at once and his talking dog. I mean, if anyone here was using magic, it would be us.
You and I make a run for it. The goat will follow me. About time something did.
But possibly my favorite example of questioning the reality in which they live is during the episode where Fred is on trial for alleged crimes committed by the Scooby Gang under his leadership, and Daphne starts listing off the actual crimes committed by the group over the years, like some know-it-all YouTuber obsessed with doing deep dives into a Saturday morning cartoon show from his childhood. not everyone's cup of tea, one of the rewards given to those who faithfully watch every episode of a series is seeing a recurring joke that follows characters throughout the run of the show. Detractors would argue this is just lazy script writing, with the humor depending upon the audience's familiarity with earlier material. But if it's used well and elicits a laugh, what's the harm? Comedy doesn't have to be an arduous exercise in the writing craft. Indeed, spending too much effort on a joke can occasionally deflate any humor it was meant to convey. Sometimes a lazy joke is what's needed for a scene. Furthermore, a common comedic formula is known as the rule of three, whereby the humor of a situation is most satisfying when the shape of the joke is arranged as a triangle rather than a single point or straight line. This is why jokes that most people tell have 3 parts of a setup before hitting the listener with the punchline. Running gags just take that concept and run with it. Be Cool, Scooby-Doo is filled with these, including Fred's fear of widths, Velma's fear of water, Daphne's hand puppets, and everyone riding Velma's back when being chased. There's even a moment when a running gag about Daphne's feud with sea creatures ends up saving the gang during the climax of the series. A common complaint about Be Cool, Scooby-Doo, notably by longtime fans, is the animation style. They hate how different the characters look compared to the original, or how the design of the show is far too similar to many other popular animated series like Rick and Morty or Family Guy. But to be fair, lots of animated series looked like this in the 2010s. It's as if studios saw the popularity of Rick and Morty or the longevity of Family Guy and said, "We want in on that." Which is something studios have always done. Even Hanna-Barbera, who spent much of the 1970s aping the success of their very own Scooby-Doo. As for Be Cool, Scooby-Doo being frequently compared to Family Guy, those comparisons are absolutely justified. I can't defend this show against that. The first time I saw the previews, my first thought was, is Seth MacFarlane doing Scooby-Doo? The only thing I can say in the defense of the design choices made for this series is, hey, at least it's not drawn by Glenn Kennedy. Art style aside, what Be Cool, Scooby-Doo does better than most Scooby series that came before and the one that came after is maintaining animation consistency. When producing an animated series, the artists are given pictures of the characters in different angles and poses as a reference for how they should draw the show. These pictures are called model sheets. When describing how consistent a show is drawn, if characters in a scene appear as they're supposed to, it's described as on model. If they don't, it's described as off model. Prior Scooby series, even going as far back as Scooby-Doo Where Are You, were well known for being constantly off model, due mostly for the usual Hanna-Barbera reasons. Tight schedules and lax production oversight. With the advent of better technology, including being able to digitize drawings for better copying and consistent coloring, it's become easier for studios to enforce quality control in their shows. Until, of course, they get back to having tight schedules and lax production oversight, once again resulting in slipshod standards. Consistency isn't something that every viewer notices. In fact, most probably wouldn't unless the way characters are drawn vary wildly enough between scenes. Viewers may subconsciously recognize everything being off-model, but not realize that's what's bothering them, so they just chalk it up to the show being ugly. To animation aficionados, however, seeing off-model animation is like having your eyeballs stub their toe. Be Cool, Scooby-Doo maintains consistent animation throughout the series, despite multiple animation houses providing the work. Other animated series often suffered badly by dividing animation duties between studios. For example, Tiny Toon Adventures was notorious when it came to how badly the quality changed between episodes. I mean, just look at how lousy these shots are. I wonder what studio handled this. Oh god. speaking of negative comparisons to Family Guy, I have to ask, what's wrong with Family Guy? To be honest, I haven't been a regular viewer for several years, but not because I felt the quality of the show dipped, but rather my viewing habits went in another direction. But even back when I watched Family Guy every week, it seemed fashionable to simply hate Seth MacFarlane. Success naturally attracts contrarians who will hate something popular simply for being popular and not on its own merits or lack thereof. I usually don't like using this argument as a defense because it sounds way too much like dismissing critics as just being jealous of how well another person is doing. However, I genuinely feel many who dislike what MacFarlane produces hate it for reasons other than the actual content of the material. The most barbed attack on Family Guy may have occurred in the 10th season of South Park when Eric Cartman went on a rant against the show for being lazy by having humor that didn't depend on the situation of the story, but just focused on pop culture references or random interchangeable jokes. It's clear this was South Park's creators, Trey Parker and Matt Stone, airing their own grievances against the popularity of Family Guy based on their own view of what deserves to be considered good comedy. I've been a fan of the South Park creators since the original Spirit of Christmas was shared on internet message boards back in the late 1990s, and even saw the Book of Mormon in person several years ago.
I believe!
But considering how Trey and Matt are known to wait until a week before an episode of South Park airs before writing, voicing, and animating it like a high school student putting off an important book report until the night before it's due, inferring that another animated series is lazy comes across as having just a little bit of a lack of self-awareness. The Simpsons has been around for over 3 decades, and it feels like critics have spent most of that time complaining that the show hasn't been funny for the previous 2. These shows would not have achieved the success they have if they weren't doing something right. People watch them and enjoy them. Does the perceived quality of the writing matter if what they produce makes people laugh? So frankly, being compared to Family Guy isn't the biting takedown critics of Be Cool Scooby-Doo seem to think it is. Going further, while much of the humor, especially every episode's focus on Daphne's quirkiness, does seem random, each episode still has a clear and concise story structure. And though perhaps with not nearly as much character advancement as in Mystery Incorporated, the members of the Scooby Gang still exhibit a lot of personality. They're excited, scared, angry, sarcastic, resigned, annoyed. The situations they're in aren't real, but these characters feel real. What they say and what they do feels real in the confines of the animated universe in which they live. As I've said before, humor is always going to be subjective, and what I find funny, you may not find funny. It also takes a lot to make me laugh. It's not that I don't enjoy funny things or can't appreciate when someone is trying to make me laugh. I love humor. I love reading comedic light novels. I love watching stand-up comedians perform. My favorite anime are the ones that focus on comedy. I recognize when something is funny and actively seek that out, even if I do nothing more than sit there quietly as the jokes wash over me like a meditating monk under a waterfall. Almost every episode of Be Cool Scooby-Doo had me laugh out loud at least once. From me, that is high praise. This last section is just a hodgepodge of a few things I noticed, liked, or at least felt like pointing out. Sometimes the scariest thing in an episode of Scooby-Doo is seeing a reminder that you're old enough to wonder how many of the kids watching will know what something is.
Wow, freaky. I've never not smelled anything this much in my life.
Well, Daphne, in a couple of years from when this episode aired, you'll probably get the chance to repeat this experience, only without the need for a medical grade nose plug. The word Scroogey on the cover of the book is spelled differently than in the episode's opening title card. This isn't something cool about the show, it's just me being a little by pointing it out.
Well, it's a good thing I'm here to audition.
Oh, great! Jokey Jody, our resident comic magician, will show you to your room.
As a child of the 1970s, I can't help but love the obvious reference to the late Doug Henning. For those who don't know, Doug Henning was to magic what Bob Ross was to painting. Oh God, I am so old. With all these great things about the series, why is Be Cool Scooby-Doo so hated? I've seen comparisons made to other cartoon reboots like Teen Titans Go, where they changed the core concept of the show but kept the same voice actors, or even the updated version of the Powerpuff Girls, where they kept the core concept of the show but changed the voice actors. Perhaps much of the hate is due to how good the preceding series was, and let's face it, Mystery Incorporated was always going to be a tough act to follow. The reason so much of this video keeps referring to Mystery Incorporated is because that series is the clear high-water mark of the entire Scooby-Doo franchise, and comparisons to it are inevitable.
Inevitable.
Fan expectations versus their disappointment isn't anything new. Those looking forward to the Netflix revival of Arrested Development certainly felt their share of disappointment. But I would argue that a better example would be how disgruntled some fans of Avatar: The Last Airbender were with the subsequent Legend of Korra. With Arrested Development, the original run set a huge bar, and what came later was a mere echo of the brilliance from years past. For Avatar fans, the follow-up series was almost as good as its predecessor, but since it wasn't a direct continuation of the previous character's journey, some would never embrace it. The Legend of Korra also faced the problem of inconsistent scheduling due to the lack of confidence on the part of the network. It started out as a regular Nickelodeon series, then moved to their website for streaming, before finally being left to flounder on a second, less popular pay channel. Be Cool Scooby-Doo faced the same scheduling nightmare. It started out as a planned Cartoon Network series like Mystery Incorporated, then moved to the less popular Boomerang channel, then to a planned release on a streaming service, before the final episodes were unceremoniously dumped back on Boomerang a few months later. Any show will find it difficult to find viewers if no one knows where and when they can view it. Now, of course, you can view this series on streaming, so if you haven't watched Be Cool Scooby-Doo, or you caught an episode or two when it was first on and it wasn't your thing, now is the time to give it another chance, because Be Cool Scooby-Doo is not only a fine show in and of itself, it's one of the best Scooby series, period. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a like and comment below. Consider subscribing as well, as I have more content on my channel, including lots of Scooby-Doo related stuff, as well as any number of topics that I felt like going over. Joke goes over. Oh.